Shalom everyone and welcome to Busisiwe, blessed in English and Baruch in Hebrew, which means increase, fruitfulness and multiplication. My name is Abigail. Today is the 13th of October 2024 as we're doing this recording, which according to Yahuah's calendar, it is the 10th of the 7th month. And on the 10th of the 7th month, we are observing a day of atonement as listed in Leviticus chapter 23, and it's also known in Hebrew as Yom Kippur or Yom Kafar. And from today, 5 days from today, we will be celebrating a Feast of Sukkot, otherwise known as Feast of Tabernacles, and 5 days from now then it would be on the 6th day of the week, which is known as Friday, and I think according to the Gregorian calendar it will be the 18th. And the focus of today's teaching, even though it is so much, it's more going to be focusing on the upcoming feast, which is the Feast of Sukkot, but I actually provided a very detailed teaching last year on the Feast of Sukkot or Feast of Tabernacle, which I'm going to link to this teaching. Today's teaching mainly is then to see what is the importance of the appointed times. The importance of appointed times, wherein we see Yahuah reconciling us, mankind, to himself, which he did through Yahushua HaMashiach, as the word tells us that Yahuah was in Yahushua when Yahushua was reconciling men to Yahuah. So we are reconciled by Yahushua HaMashiach to the Father. And how then do we see this reconciliation taking place? Through the appointed times. And how do we see this reconciliation of man to Yahuah through Yahuah's appointed times? How do we see it in the TaNaK? And what is the TaNaK? In the previous video, when I was talking about, when I provided teaching on Day of Atonement, I covered the issue of, I addressed the issue of covenant, that it was incorrect for the translators of the Bible to separate the Bible between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's one word of Yahuah, which is made up of the Torah, otherwise known as instructions, the Nabim, otherwise known as the prophets, as well as the Kethubim, which is known as writings. So holistically, the word is made up of the instructions, the prophets, as well as the writings. Hence, the acronym TaNaK comes from T for Torah, which is instructions, N for Nabim, which is prophets, and K for Kethubim, which is writing. And then holistically, that becomes then the word of Yahuah. The issue of the Old Testament and the New Testament is incorrect. If anything, Yahuah speaks about the renewed covenant, and I mentioned that I'll address the aspects of the renewed covenant in another teaching. But let us then zoom in focusing on how do we see this reconciliation of man to Yahuah through the appointed times. What is the importance of the appointed times in our era, in our generation? We're going to start with Pesach or Passover. Now, the Passover, we find it in the Torah or instructions in the book of Leviticus 23. So all the appointed times that I'm going to refer to, which there are 7 appointed times, all of them, I'm going to be quoting them from a Torah, otherwise known as instruction. Remember the TaNaK, the T part. Torah or instructions, Leviticus chapter 23. And not only I'm going to be contrasting the Torah and the writings, but also I'll be highlighting the dates or the days which we're supposed to be observing certain appointed times and link them to our reconciliation to Yahuah. So as I said, the first one, that is Pesach or Passover, it is to be observed on the 14th of the first month, which is the month of Abib. And we find this in verse 5 of Leviticus chapter 23, which says, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the evening, is the Passover to Yahuah. All right. And then the second appointed time, is the unleavened bread. The unleavened bread is to be celebrated on the 15th day, or from the 15th day of the first month, 15th day of the month of Abib. And also Leviticus 23 verse 6, it says, and on the 15th yom of this month is the festival of unleavened bread to Yahuah. 7 days or 7 yomim you are to eat unleavened bread. All these days are Yahuah's days. Even this one, it says unleavened bread to Yahuah. And we've already covered these teachings on Passover, unleavened bread, as well as the first fruits in the previous teachings. You can please go to the playlist that is titled Appointed Times of Yahuah. You will see all the teachings relating to the appointed times of Yahuah. Now, what I want us to look at then is, how do we merge the Torah, or the instructions, and the writings, or the Kethubims, in light of the appointed times? Because some people think that the Leviticus 23 was for certain era, certain generation, certain people. It's not applicable to us. The unleavened bread, the first fruit, all those appointed times are not applicable to us. It is for this reason then that when we merge it with the writings, remember we find the writings in the epistles, what is generally termed as the Gospels. Your Psalms, your Proverbs, Kings are also explained in another teaching what forms part of the writings. Now, the book of Matstsah, which is in the writings, book of Matstsah, chapter 26, from verse 17 to 20, chapter 26. So this is Matthew 26, Matstsah 26, verse 17 to 20. It reads, and prior to unleavened bread, the Talmudim came to Yahushua, saying to him, where do you wish us to prepare for you to eat the Passover? And he said, go into the city to a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is near. I am to observe the Passover at your house with my Talmudim, or with my disciples. And the Talmudim did as Yahushua had ordered them, and prepared the Passover. And when the evening came, they were all seated down. So what I've just did now is that I've actually combined both the Pesach or Passover and the unleavened bread, which is also combined in the book of Matstsah 26, or maybe 26 from verse 17 to verse 20, because Yahushua addressed both the unleavened bread and the Passover. Now, what is the fulfillment of these appointed times? We see that Yahushua himself became the unleavened bread. Hence, I spoke about how do we see the fulfillment of Yahuah's reconciliation plan, purpose in our lives through Yahushua HaMashiach. It's then if we read the same book of Matstsah or Matthew chapter 26, and from verse now 26, so Matthew 26 from verse 26, it reads, "And as they were eating, Yahushua took bread. He took an unleavened bread as they were celebrating the Passover." And part of celebrating the Passover is that they had to eat an unleavened bread, which is what we read in verse 6 of Leviticus 23. "And as they were eating, Yahushua took bread, the unleavened bread, and having blessed, broke and gave it to the Talmudim and said, 'Take, eat, this is my body.' And take the cup, and giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood that of the renewed covenant, which is shed for many for the forgiveness of sins.'" So Yahushua is already here telling us about a renewed covenant. It's not a totally new covenant, it's a renewed covenant. But the part that I want to also raise at this point in time is that a lot of Christians, they observe what they call a Holy Communion. But it is right that Yahushua said it. Even actually Shaul said it. He says that as often as you partake of Yahushua's blood and his body, you are reminding of his coming, or we're reminding each other of his coming. So it is important that we partake of his body and of his blood. What I didn't know until of late, that this body, this bread that we use, which is representative of Yahushua's body, it must be an unleavened bread. We just used to just take bread with leaven, with yeast, which shows that there was no understanding, which shows that there was no understanding from the Torah perspective. We just read from the writings perspective, which was in 1 Corinthians, where Shaul speaks about taking the bread and the blood, which other people take red wine, and obviously children will take grape juice, red grape juice. But we only took it from that perspective, that you must just take bread. We didn't understand that it was an unleavened bread. And not just the unleavened bread, it was unleavened bread which has a particular meaning, specifically why it had to be an unleavened bread, because we had to detox ourselves from the leaven or the yeast or the teachings of the Pharisees, the teachings of men, because a lot of what we do are actually traditions of men. And as often then as we take the unleavened bread, we are then reminding ourselves of doing stock take, of cleaning up that which is of Yahuah and that which is teachings of men. So this is the emphasis that I wanted to raise when we partake in what we call isidlo, or what is called Holy Communion, is that we need to be understanding that we are doing what Yahushua did when he was with his disciples the night before he was nailed or impaled on a tree. And that he did with an unleavened bread. We also have to do as often as we can, remember what he did for us, his sacrifice, and also proclaiming his coming by using an unleavened bread. Verse 29, then it says, "But I say to you, I shall certainly not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on, till that yom when I drink it anew with you in the reign of my Father." So what we're seeing here is that in verse 27, it said, he took the cup and giving thanks, he gave it to them. So he gave them the cup, but he didn't drink it himself. He didn't drink of the wine. And he said, I am not going to drink it. I will only drink it at the time when I drink it in the reign of my Father. When is the reign of the Father? The reign of the Father will happen when we then celebrate Sukkot, when we then celebrate the tabernacle, because at that particular time, he will then tabernacle with us. At that particular time, Yahuah, the Father, will tabernacle with us in the new heaven, in the new earth, when after he had created a new earth and a new heaven. So Yahuah will tabernacle with us where? Here on earth, but it will not be this earth as it is. It will be a new earth. He will tabernacle with us and reign and rule here on earth. And when he does that, this is where the word talks about that they will not need for the sun, because Yahuah himself will be the light. And so when we then celebrate the feast of Sukkot, or the feast of Tabernacle, which we'll be doing on the 15th day of the 7th month, as I said in our count, it will be next week Friday. This is where we are reminded that just like Yahuah or the Father once walked through the cool of the day in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Kua, otherwise known as Eve, he will yet again live amongst us, and he will rule both in heaven and on earth at that particular time. So Yahusha then became this unleavened bread when he says, let anyone who is hungry come and eat of me. I am the bread of life. When he talks about that your fathers ate manna in the wilderness, but they died, and he who eats of me this bread of life, the unleavened bread that is not diluted, that is not polluted, will have abundant and eternal life. Also, another fulfillment that we see in the appointed times is also that Yahushua became the lamb for us, a spotless lamb that died for the sins of the world. Exactly at the time of the Passover that was celebrated according to what Yahuah instructed Yisrael when they were leaving Mitzrayim, that they had to kill a spotless lamb and take its blood and put it on the doorpost, which is found in the book of Shabuoth, or Exodus 12 verse 13. It says, the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I shall pass over. So the blood of Yahusha was the fulfillment, which we also see through the appointed times, of how Yahuah reconciled us human beings unto himself. So that is, it's not just an isolated event that is just like an abstract event. All these are connected according to Yahuah's calendar, Yahuah's times, in being able to reveal not only his redemption plan for us, but both redemption and reconciliation till we forever live with him. If we look at the first fruits, now the first fruit is celebrated on the first day of the week after the Passover. And according to the Torah, we read that it says, speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits, your harvest, to the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuah for your acceptance. on the morrow after the Shabbat. So what is happening here? The priest is actually presenting this first fruits to Yahuah for whose acceptance? For our acceptance. This was written in Leviticus 23 that the priest had to do that. Now, when we celebrate the first fruit in our times, in our generations, we are reminded that Yahushua HaMashiach became the first fruit that was offered before Yahuah for our acceptance. And we find this in the book of Yahuah, which is known as John, which is also in the Kethubim or the writings. And it reads, and on the first day of the week, Miriam from Magdala came early to the tomb while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. Yahushua said to her, so this was verse 1. If you read verse 17, it then tells us that Yahuah or John 20 now, verse 17, Yahushua said to her, do not touch me, because Miriam wanted to touch him. And Yahushua said, do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my Yahuah and your Yahuah. So what is Yahushua, is what the word is telling us? It's telling us that Yahushua rose after 3 days and 3 nights. He rose from the dead after 3 days and 3 nights, and he rose on the first day of the week, and he then became then the first fruit that was then presented to Yahuah. Hence he said to Miriam, do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. Now this is the lesson and how we see the two being linked together. The two being the Torah, Leviticus 23, and the writings, the book of Yahuah or John, the book of Matstsah or Matthew. This is how we see the two, the word of Yahuah blending together. This is how we see the appointed times of Yahuah being manifest and fulfilled through Yahushua in what he did, because even Yahushua himself said, I did not come to do away with the law or to get rid of the law, but I'm actually here to fulfill both the law, which is the Torah or instruction, as well as the prophets, which is the Nabim. And all the writings of Yahushua, we find them in what is termed the Kethubim or the writings. Now, we have now seen how Yahushua has fulfilled the Passover, the unleavened bread, and the first fruits. The next part that we're going to be looking at is the fulfillment of the Torah or the instructions or the law, as well as the prophets, is when what is termed Pentecost happens, or rather happened, in which is Shabuoth or Feast of Weeks. Now the Shabuoth is then the fourth of the appointed times, and we find it in verse 15 also of Uikara 23 or Leviticus 23, which says, and from the morrow after the Shabbat, from the yom that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you shall count for yourself 7 complete Shabbaths or Shabbats. Until the morrow after the 7th Shabbat, you count 50 yomim or 50 days. Then you shall bring a new grain offering to Yahuah. So the Shabuoth is celebrated 7 weeks from the first fruits, or 7 weeks from the resurrection of Yahushua HaMashiach, which is read from the Torah. In Kethubim or writings, we then see it in the book of Acts. It was fulfilled. And when the day of the Festival of Weeks, because they were still celebrating the Festival of Weeks even then, or Shabuoth then, they were all in one mind. This is referring to the followers of Yahushua HaMashiach. In total, there were 120 in the upper room. And suddenly, there came a sound from the heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them divided tongues as of fire, and settled on each one of them, and they were filled with the Kodesh Ruach, or the Ruach HaKodesh, and began to speak with other tongues as the Ruach, or the Spirit, gave them utterance. Now we are seeing the fulfillment of the Shabuoth, the coming of the Ruach HaKodesh, which Yahushua had promised to his disciples in the book of Yahuah. He says, it is expedient for you that I go away. For if I go away, if I go to the Father, then the Father will send his Ruach, and who will guide you into all truth. He will teach you all things. He says, I'm not able to tell you everything because you're not able to understand, or to hear or understand, to receive. Yes, he said you're not able to receive what I'm telling you, but when he, the Spirit of truth, come, he will tell you all things, for he will take that which is of mine and will reveal it to you. And I'm not saying that which is of mine, because everything that is mine is actually of the Father, because I have received it myself from the Father. And when the Ruach of truth comes, the Ruach HaKodesh comes, the Holy Spirit comes, he will be with you forever. He will be your companion. He will be your teacher. He will reveal things to come to you. He will also remind you what I've taught you. Now, the Ruach HaKodesh descended, came on earth on the feast of Shabuoth, on the Feast of Weeks, when they were in the upper room. And the book of Acts chapter 2 verse 2, it talks about that it came a sound from heaven, of a sound of a rushing mighty wind. Verse 3 tells us that there appeared divided tongues as of fire. Where else did we see this? We saw this in the book of Exodus chapter 19 verse 18, because on the day when they were when Moshe ascended on Mount Sinai, where Yahuah gave Moshe the commandments, that was the Feast of Weeks. That was the Feast of Shabuoth. Why is it so? Because this is where the Yisrael said to Aharon, Moshe has gone for too long. Tomorrow is a feast unto Yahuah. Let's make a golden calf that will be representing Yahuah for us. They knew it was, when they said that tomorrow is the feast of Yahuah, go read that part. They were referring to the feast of Shabuoth. They were referring to the feast of weeks, because it was 49 days. It was the days that have, it was actually 49 days since they left, 50 days actually, the Shabuoth. It was 50 days since they left Mitzrayim, which they left Mitzrayim on Passover. So you can now see that we used to be reading these books in isolation as abstract. You're reading the book of Exodus chapter 19 verse 18, or Shabuoth 19 verse 18, but now we see how Exodus connects to Leviticus 23, how Exodus 19 connects to Leviticus 23, and how it connects to Acts chapter 2 verse 1. Where Yahushua came, because what happened in Shabuoth 19 verse 18, and Mount Sinai was in smoke, all of it, because Yahuah descended upon in fire, just like the Ruach of Yahuah descended at that upper room where they were at. in the form of tongues as of fire. Yahuah also descended on Mount Sinai upon it in fire. Verse 19 of Shabuoth 19 or Exodus 19 takes about that the blast of the ram's horn sounded long and became louder and louder. So even with this, we also see that in Acts chapter 2, it talks about that there was a sound that came, a sound of a rushing wind that came, and then they saw the tongues of fire. So we're going to pause at this particular point where we have now gone through the 4 appointed times, linking them with the Torah or the instructions to the writings or Kethubim, as well as seeing the fulfillment of it as I have explained. So all the 4 have been, the 4 appointed times have been fulfilled through the scriptures that I read, I touch on. After the break, we are now going to be looking at the remaining 3 appointed times which have not been fulfilled as yet, which we are looking forward to the fulfillment of those appointed times. So for now, we will just take a quick break and we'll be back.